My lovely listeners, welcome back to another episode of Lit Talk with Lisa. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Grab a cup of tea, or maybe you're listening on your way to work, or while folding laundry, or even out for a walk. Wherever you are, I want you to just settle into this space with me. Because today we're diving into a book that I promise has the power to change the way you think about your everyday life. So, let me start with a little story. A few years back, I had this whole grand plan about becoming a morning person. You know the kind. The people who wake up at 5 a.m., meditate, exercise, journal, cook a healthy breakfast, all before you've even hit snooze on your alarm. I thought, yes, this is going to be me. I'm going to transform my life just by changing my mornings. So I set the alarm. First day, I woke up, dragged myself out of bed, made some tea, and actually felt pretty good. Day 2, a little harder, but I still managed. Day 3, let's just say the snooze button, and I had a very, very close relationship. By day 4, I had given up completely, convincing myself, well, maybe I'm just not cut out to be one of those people. And here's the funny thing. I kept repeating that cycle over and over again for years. New planner, new journal, new alarm app, you name it, I tried it. And every time, I thought the problem was me. Like maybe I lacked discipline or willpower. But when I first picked up James Clear's Atomic Habits, I had this light bulb moment. It wasn't that I was a failure at self-improvement. It was that I had been going about it the wrong way. See, the whole premise of Atomic Habits is deceptively simple but incredibly powerful. Small habits, when compounded over time, lead to massive change. And not in the big, overwhelming, change your whole life overnight kind of way, but in the tiny 1% improvements that stack up kind of way. That's what hooked me. Because let's be honest, most of us don't fail at our goals because we don't want them. We fail because we try to leap into change all at once instead of building it gradually. And that's exactly why this book is so meaningful, especially today. Think about the world we're living in. Everything is about quick fixes, instant results, overnight transformations. But real lasting change? It doesn't usually look like that. It's quieter, slower, more subtle. And yet, when you look back after weeks, months, or even years, you realize just how much you've grown. So in today's episode, we're going to explore the very first lessons of Atomic Habits. These are the foundation, the ideas that will not only help us understand how habits work, but also why they're so important for shaping the kind of person we want to become. And trust me, once you see habits in this light, you'll never look at your daily routines the same way again. Let's start with one of the big takeaways early in the book. The idea of identity-based habits. Now, when I first read this, it kind of stopped me in my tracks. Because, like I said earlier, I was always focusing on goals. Wake up at 5 a.m., exercise every day, eat healthy. And that's how most of us think, right? We set goals. But James Clear flips this on its head and says, wait a second. Instead of focusing on the outcome you want, focus on the type of person you want to become. For example, instead of saying, I want to run a marathon, you start with, I want to become a runner. Instead of saying, I want to quit smoking, you say, I'm not a smoker. That little shift from outcome to identity changes everything. Because when you start identifying with the habit, your actions naturally follow. Let me give you a quick relatable example. Imagine two people trying to quit smoking. One person, when offered a cigarette, says, no thanks, I'm trying to quit. The other person says, no thanks, I'm not a smoker. Which one do you think is more likely to actually quit? The second one, right? Because their refusal isn't tied to willpower, it's tied to who they believe they are. That hit me hard because it made me realize how often I was setting goals that didn't align with my identity. I was saying, I want to be a morning person. But deep down, I still believed I was a night owl who loved staying up late. And as long as that belief was there, no alarm clock on earth was going to fix it. Now, I want you to pause and think about your own life for a second. What are the identities you're carrying around? Do you tell yourself things like, I'm just not good with money, or I've never been athletic, or I'm bad at keeping routines? Those little identity statements may feel harmless, but they're actually shaping your behavior every single day. The beauty of habits, according to James Clear, is that every small action you take is like a vote for the type of person you want to become. If you write a paragraph, you're casting a vote for being a writer. If you cook a healthy meal, you're casting a vote for being someone who cares about their health. If you sit down with your kid to help them with homework, you're casting a vote for being a present and supportive parent. Each tiny action is a little ballot slip going into the box of your future self. And here's the best part. You don't need a unanimous election to change your identity. You don't need to cast 1,000,000 votes before it counts. You just need enough small wins to prove to yourself, yes, this is who I am now. That's how identity shifts. Not overnight, but through repeated actions that confirm it. Let me share another little personal anecdote here. A while back, I wanted to become the kind of person who reads every day. But I had this belief that reading meant finishing a chapter, or sitting for an hour, or making it some big, ceremonious thing. And then, of course, I'd get busy, or tired, or distracted, and the habit wouldn't stick. After reading Atomic Habits, I realized I could start tiny, like literally reading one page, just one page before bed. At first, it felt almost silly, like it didn't matter. But you know what? That one page turned into 3, then 5, then a chapter. And before I knew it, I wasn't trying to become a reader. I just was a reader. Because I was casting that vote every night. This ties directly into another powerful concept from the early part of the book, the 1% rule. Now, if you've ever played sports or worked in business, you've probably heard of this idea, but James Clear gives it such a practical twist. He says, if you can just get 1% better every day, those tiny improvements compound, just like interest in a bank account. Think about it. If you get 1% better every day for a year, you'll end up 37 times better by the end. But if you get 1% worse every day, those small slips compound too, and you can spiral downward without even realizing it. That's why habits are like double-edged swords. They can either work for you or against you. Now here's the thing. 1% is tiny. It's the kind of improvement that doesn't even feel like it matters in the moment. Drinking 1 glass of water instead of soda. Doing 2 push-ups instead of 0. Writing down 1 idea instead of waiting for inspiration to strike. You're not going to see the results today or even tomorrow. But over time, it adds up in ways you can't imagine. And I know, it's hard to trust the process when the results aren't visible right away. We live in a world that celebrates the before and after photos, not the messy middle where the change is actually happening. But James Clear reminds us that habits are like seeds planted underground. You don't see anything at first, but roots are forming, and eventually that tiny seed breaks through the soil. So, if you've ever felt frustrated, like you're putting in effort but not seeing results, remember that idea of compounding. The early stages feel invisible, but they're not wasted. They're building a foundation. Let me tie this back to something practical. Think about brushing your teeth. It's such a tiny, almost mindless habit. You don't see the effect of brushing once or even twice. But over years, those 2 minutes in the morning and at night add up to healthy teeth. The same principle applies to every area of life: health, relationships, finances, creativity. Small habits done consistently beat big changes done occasionally. And that's why Atomic Habits resonates so much. It takes the pressure off this idea that you have to make giant leaps. Instead, it's about tiny steps repeated with consistency that quietly change your trajectory. Now, as we've started unpacking these early lessons, identity-based habits and the 1% rule, I want you to sit with these ideas for a bit. Think about the kind of person you want to become, not just the goals you want to achieve. Think about the small votes you can cast today, even if they feel insignificant. And remember, the habits you're building right now are shaping the future version of yourself in ways you might not even see yet. In our next part, we'll dig deeper into the mechanics of how habits actually work, the cues, the routines, the rewards, and how you can start designing your environment to make good habits easier and bad habits harder. That's where the real magic of this book comes alive. But for now, let's pause here, because these first lessons alone are enough to sit with. Trust me, if you let them sink in, they can already shift the way you approach your everyday choices. You know what's really interesting about habits? It's not just about the actions themselves. It's about the system behind them. Like, think about the last time you tried to start a new habit. Maybe it was exercising or eating healthier, or even something simple like drinking more water. We often focus on the behavior itself, but what we don't realize is that there are invisible forces shaping whether that habit sticks or falls apart. And that's exactly where James Clear starts getting into the nitty-gritty of how habits actually work. He introduces this framework called the 4 laws of behavior change. And honestly, when I first read this part, I thought, okay, this sounds like some complicated theory. But then as I kept going, I was like, oh wow, this is basically just how human behavior works, boiled down into really practical steps. It's so straightforward that once you see it, you can't unsee it. The first law is, make it obvious. Habits are tied to cues, those little triggers in your environment that nudge you toward an action. For example, if you always snack when you watch TV, the cue is probably just sitting on the couch or turning on Netflix. If you always grab your phone first thing in the morning, the cue is literally your phone being right next to your bed. And here's the thing, our brains love to work on autopilot. We don't always consciously decide, yes, I will eat chips now. It's more like you see the bag, you feel that little itch, and before you even know it, your hand's in there. That's how powerful cues are. James Clear talks about how one of the best ways to build a new habit is to design your environment so that the cues for good habits are obvious and the cues for bad habits are less visible. I'll give you a funny little example from my own life. For the longest time, I kept telling myself I wanted to drink more water. But I'd always forget because my water bottle was tucked away in the kitchen while I was at my desk working. I'd sit for hours, get thirsty, then end up grabbing a coffee instead. When I finally put a big, clear bottle of water right next to my laptop, bam! Suddenly, I was drinking more water without even thinking about it. The cue was right in front of me. And it works the other way too. If you want to cut down on a bad habit, you make the cue less obvious. Like, one of my friends was trying to watch less TV, and what she did was unplug the TV after every use and put the remote in a drawer across the room. Did that stop her from watching completely? No. But that extra little bit of friction, the inconvenience of plugging it in and fishing out the remote, was enough to make her pause and think, do I really want to watch right now? And often, she'd just skip it. That's the power of cues. They're these subtle nudges in the background, but they steer your behavior way more than willpower alone. Now here's another technique from the book that ties into making habits obvious. It's called implementation intention. Fancy name, but the idea is super simple. Instead of vaguely saying, I'll exercise more, you tie your habit to a specific time and place. Like, I will do 10 push-ups after I brush my teeth. Or, I will meditate in the living room at 7 a.m. When you give your brain a clear map of when and where the habit happens, it's way more likely to stick. I tried this with journaling. I'd always tell myself, yeah, I'll journal when I get a chance. But of course, life would happen, and that chance never came. After reading this part of the book, I decided, okay, every night, right after I brush my teeth, I'll write one line in my journal. Just one line. And because it was tied to something I was already doing every night, brushing my teeth, it became automatic. Like the cue was built in. And before I knew it, that single line often turned into a whole page. Another related tool that James Clear suggests is called habit stacking. And this one honestly blew my mind with how clever it is. The concept is, take a habit you already do consistently, and then stack your new habit on top of it. So instead of trying to carve out brand new space in your day, you're piggybacking on something that's already established. Think of it like this. After I pour my morning coffee, I will read one page of a book. Or, after I take off my work shoes, I will immediately change into workout clothes. The beauty of this is that your existing habits become little anchors, reminders that pull the new habit along. I've been using this with stretching. I always make tea in the morning. It's automatic. I don't even think about it. So I told myself, after I put the kettle on, I'll do a 2-minute stretch. And guess what? Now every time the water boils, I'm reaching for the sky or touching my toes without it feeling forced. It just flows naturally. And what I love about this idea is how flexible it is. You can chain habits together into little routines. Like, after I brush my teeth, I floss. After I floss, I write in my journal. After I write in my journal, I set out my clothes for the morning. And before you know it, you've got this seamless chain of good habits guiding your evening. Let's pause here for a moment because I want to point out something important. Notice how none of these strategies rely on motivation. They're not about feeling inspired or willing yourself to do the right thing. They're about shaping the environment and creating cues so that the good habit is almost the default option. Motivation comes and goes, but cues are steady. I actually had a listener write to me once, telling me she used this exact strategy for saving money. She said every time she made her morning coffee at home, she'd transfer $5 into her savings account. The new habit stacked onto the old one. And she told me it started as just a little game. But by the end of the year, she had saved over $1,000 without even realizing it. That's the magic of cues and stacking. Now, I want to take us a little deeper into the second law of behavior change. Make it attractive. Because, let's be real, no matter how much we know something is good for us, if it feels boring or unpleasant, our brains are going to fight it. James Clear points out that the more attractive a habit is, the more likely we are to do it. And one of the coolest strategies here is something called temptation bundling. Basically, you pair something you need to do with something you want to do. Like, I can only watch my favorite show while I'm on the treadmill. Or, I'll only listen to that addictive podcast while I'm cleaning the house. Suddenly, the thing that felt like a chore becomes tied to something you actually look forward to. I've personally used this with audiobooks. I love listening to novels, but I don't always love doing chores. So I made a rule for myself. I only listen to audiobooks while I'm cleaning or doing dishes. And now, I weirdly look forward to washing dishes because it means I get to find out what happens next in the story. And if you think about it, this makes sense. Our brains are wired to chase rewards, right? So when you bundle a habit you want to build with something instantly gratifying, it's like tricking your brain into looking forward to it. Another angle James Clear talks about is the power of social norms. Humans are deeply influenced by the people around us, way more than we admit. If you hang out with people who love hiking, you're more likely to pick up hiking. If your coworkers always go out for fast food, you might find yourself joining them even if you had packed a salad. We don't like to think of ourselves as copycats, but in many ways, we're constantly mirroring what our tribe does. So, one way to make habits attractive is to surround yourself with people who embody the behaviors you want. If you want to exercise more, join a group class or find a workout buddy. If you want to read more, hang out with people who love talking about books. Even subtle exposure to people living out the habits you aspire to makes those habits feel more normal, more appealing. I remember when I joined this small local writing group. We'd meet once a week in a cafe, and everyone would just sit and write together for an hour. Honestly, half the time, I wasn't even that motivated to write at home. But because I knew other people were going to show up with their laptops and actually write, I felt like, okay, I've got to do this too. It wasn't discipline. It was just the pull of the group making writing more attractive. So, if you're thinking about a habit you want to build, ask yourself, how can I make it more appealing? Can I bundle it with something I enjoy? Can I connect with people who already do it? Because once the habit feels rewarding in the moment, not just in some distant future, you'll find it so much easier to stick with. All right, let me bring all this together for a second. We've talked about making habits obvious through cues, environment design, implementation intentions, and habit stacking. And we've touched on making them attractive through temptation bundling and surrounding yourself with the right tribe. Together, these form the first two laws of behavior change. And honestly, just these two alone can transform how you approach your daily routines. But of course, the story doesn't end here. There are still two more laws that complete this framework. Laws that deal with making habits easy and making them satisfying. And once you put all four together, it's like having a blueprint for building any habit you want. We'll get into those next, but before we do, I want you to just think about your own environment for a moment. Look around you. What cues are shaping your behavior right now? Are they pulling you toward the habits you want, or the ones you'd rather leave behind? And what tiny tweaks, like moving a water bottle, can you make your habit more appealing? stacking a new habit onto an old one, or pairing something with a little reward could shift the balance in your favor. That's where the magic begins. And next, we'll explore how to make habits not just attractive, but also effortless, so they slide into your life almost without resistance. Now, here's where things get really exciting. Because once you've set up those clear cues and made your habits attractive, the next step is making them easy. And honestly, this part spoke to me on such a deep level, because I realized so many of my failed habits weren't about motivation or even desire. They were about friction. Just those tiny little points of resistance that made a habit feel heavier than it needed to be. James Clear says something so simple but so powerful. Make it easy. If you want a habit to stick, reduce the barriers. If you want to break a habit, increase the barriers. And the more I thought about this, the more I could see how true it was in my everyday life. Let me tell you a quick story. I once decided I was going to start doing yoga at home. I had the mat, I had the videos bookmarked, I had everything ready, or so I thought. But every morning, when I actually went to start, I'd think, ugh, I have to roll out the mat, move the coffee table, change into leggings, find the video, connect my laptop to the TV. And guess what? Most days, I just skip it. It wasn't that I didn't want to do yoga. It was that the setup itself was exhausting. So, after reading this part of Atomic Habits, I tried something different. I cleared a corner of my living room where the mat stayed rolled out all the time. No moving furniture, no searching for equipment. I even left a water bottle next to it. Suddenly, it was easier to just drop down and do 5 minutes of yoga than it was to make excuses. And that's the point. When you reduce friction, the habit flows naturally. James Clear calls this principle the 2-minute rule. The idea is, when you're starting a new habit, scale it down so small it can be done in 2 minutes or less. Because let's be real, most of us fail because we start too big. We say we'll read an hour a night, run 5 miles every morning, cook elaborate healthy meals. And then life happens. We get tired, we get busy, and the giant mountain of effort feels impossible to climb. But what if the habit was so tiny it was almost laughable? Like, read 1 page, put on running shoes, write 1 sentence. Those little 2-minute starters remove the intimidation factor. And here's the magical part. Once you start, momentum takes over. You read 1 page, and often you'll read 3 more. You put on your running shoes, and suddenly you're out the door. You write 1 sentence, and before you know it, you've got a paragraph. I'll give you an example from a friend of mine. She wanted to floss daily, but could never stick with it. So she made a deal with herself. She would floss 1 tooth. Just 1. That was it. At first, it seemed silly. What's the point of flossing 1 tooth? But here's the thing. Once you're holding the floss and flossing 1 tooth, you're already in the process. It's easier to just finish the whole mouth than stop halfway. And within weeks, flossing had become automatic for her. This rule taught me something huge. It's not about doing the whole habit perfectly from the start. It's about reinforcing the identity we talked about earlier. Every time you do even the tiniest version of a habit, you're casting a vote for being that kind of person. You don't have to run 5 miles to be a runner. You just have to put on your shoes and step outside. The rest will come. Now, there's another side to this make it easy law, and that's the idea of automation. Because let's be honest, our willpower isn't always reliable. Sometimes we're tired, distracted, stressed. So if we can design our environment in a way that the habit happens automatically, we don't even have to think about it. Think about direct deposit for savings. If your paycheck automatically sends a portion into a savings account, you don't have to remember to save. It just happens. Or think about subscriptions. Sometimes we laugh about how sneaky they are, but they're a great example of how friction works. If something renews automatically, you're far more likely to stick with it than if you had to sign up again every month. I tried this with groceries. I always wanted to eat more fruits and veggies, but I'd forget to buy them. So I set up a weekly grocery delivery with produce included. Suddenly, instead of relying on willpower at the store, I just had apples and spinach showing up at my door. It felt effortless. This is why James Clear emphasizes you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And your systems get a lot stronger when you make the good habits automatic and easy. But let me flip this around for a second. Because the same principle works for breaking bad habits, just in reverse. If you want to do less of something, increase the friction. For example, if you're scrolling social media too much, log out every time. Or even better, delete the apps from your home screen so you have to dig for them. Those tiny speed bumps interrupt the autopilot mode. One of my friends told me she was addicted to checking email at night. She'd be in bed, phone glowing, just scrolling through work stuff. So she made a rule. She'd put her phone charger in the kitchen. That way, when she went to bed, her phone stayed out of reach. Did it completely cure her? No. But it created just enough friction to make mindless midnight scrolling less likely. Here's a fun way to picture it. Imagine water flowing downhill. Water always takes the path of least resistance. If you want good habits to stick, you need to make them the downhill path. If you want to stop bad habits, you make them the uphill climb. It's not about forcing the water. It's about shaping the slope. Now let me share something that might surprise you. Making habits easy doesn't mean you're being lazy or lowering your standards. It actually means you're being smart about how human behavior works. Because the truth is, motivation is fickle, but friction is predictable. If the habit is simple to start, you'll almost always find yourself doing more than you planned. Think about going to the gym. If the gym is a 30-minute drive away, how often do you think you'll realistically go? But if you find a gym 5 minutes from your house, or better yet, keep a set of weights in your living room, you've removed the biggest obstacle. And suddenly, working out is no longer a Herculean effort. So, as we're sitting here, I want you to reflect on your own routines. What's one habit you've been trying to build? And what's the friction stopping you? Is it the time it takes to get ready? The energy of finding your tools? The fact that it feels too overwhelming? And then ask yourself, how can I make it smaller, simpler, or more automatic? Because once you strip away that friction, habits almost run themselves. All right, before we move on, let me touch on one more piece of this puzzle that James Clear talks about, because it really brings everything together. The role of repetition. We often think success comes from intensity. One big workout, one huge burst of productivity, 1 week of extreme dieting. But habits aren't built on intensity. They're built on consistency. Clear uses the phrase, you don't need to be perfect, you just need to be consistent. And that stuck with me, because when you repeat a habit often enough, it becomes ingrained. The more you practice, the easier it becomes, not because you've suddenly developed iron willpower, but because your brain has wired it in. It's like trailblazing in the woods. The first time you walk a new path, it's rough, full of branches, hard to follow. But the more times you walk it, the clearer it gets, until it becomes a smooth trail. That's what repetition does for habits. And this is why the 2-minute rule is so powerful. You're not aiming for a perfect performance. You're aiming for reps. Even if the action is tiny, every repetition is carving that path in your brain. Over time, it becomes easier and easier until the habit feels almost automatic. So to pull this all together, making habits easy isn't about lowering the bar. It's about lowering the entry point. Once you're in motion, momentum takes care of the rest. It's about reducing friction for the good habits, adding friction for the bad ones, and repeating the process enough times that it becomes second nature. And this flows perfectly into the next principle, because once a habit is easy to start, the final question is, how do you make it satisfying enough to stick around? Because let's be honest, if something feels rewarding, our brains light up and say, yes, let's do that again. And if it doesn't, well, the habit tends to fizzle out. That's where we'll head next, into the fascinating role of rewards, satisfaction, and why our brains crave that little hit of pleasure to seal the deal. And here's the thing about habits that always amazes me. They don't just shape what you do, they shape who you are becoming. When James Clear says that habits are like the compound interest of self-improvement, he isn't just talking about brushing your teeth or saving a little money every month. He's pointing at something much deeper. Every small choice, every little repetition, is like a brushstroke on the canvas of your life. It's quiet, it's subtle, and most of the time, you don't notice it in the moment. But step back after weeks or months, and suddenly there's this whole picture staring back at you. I think that's what makes this book so powerful. It doesn't give you a rigid plan or a one-size-fits-all formula. Instead, it hands you tools. Gentle, practical, realistic tools that you can adapt to your own life. Whether you're a college student trying to study more effectively, a parent juggling 10 things at once, or just someone who feels a little stuck in their routines, these ideas fit. They're not about perfection, they're about direction. About nudging your life a little closer to the version of yourself you actually want to be. I'll be honest, for me, reading Atomic Habits was kind of like being gently called out. I realized how often I made goals that sounded good. I'll write every day, I'll get in shape, I'll finally organize my house. But I wasn't setting up the systems to support them. And that's the big shift the book gave me. Habits aren't about willpower or motivation or even grand intentions. They're about design. If you design your environment, your cues, your systems, the habits follow. And it also gave me a lot of compassion for myself. Because how many times have we all said, I just don't have discipline, or I must not want it badly enough. When really, it's not that we're broken. It's that we've been relying on brute force instead of gentle structure. Once I started stacking little habits, shrinking them down to that 2-minute rule, making them obvious and satisfying, everything felt lighter. Less like punishment, more like building a rhythm I actually enjoy. What I really love, too, is how the book reframes failure. You know how sometimes you miss a day and you think, that's it, I've blown it? James Clear reminds us that habits are about the long game. Missing once doesn't ruin you. What matters is not breaking the chain twice. What matters is showing up more often than not. And that reminder has saved me from giving up so many times. Here's something that stuck with me. I remember one night after a long day, I was tempted to just crash into bed without journaling. And then I thought about what I'd read, and I was like, okay, I don't have to write a page. I can just write one sentence. So I opened the notebook, scribbled a single thought, closed it, and went to bed. It wasn't perfect, but it was a vote cast for the kind of person I wanted to be. That's the heart of Atomic Habits. Little votes that eventually add up to an identity. And isn't that kind of freeing? That we don't have to do it all today. That we can start small, and those small steps are enough. Enough to shift the direction. Enough to change who we are, slowly becoming. So, if I had to boil this book down to one big takeaway, it would be this. Don't underestimate the power of small. Small habits matter. Small systems shape you, and small choices repeated create a life. Now, I want you to pause and really think about your own life. What's one habit, just one, that could change things for you if you stuck with it? Maybe it's as tiny as drinking a glass of water first thing in the morning. Maybe it's 5 minutes of stretching, or reading a single page, or turning your phone off for the first 15 minutes after you wake up. It doesn't have to be big. In fact, it shouldn't be big. It should feel laughably small. But it should be a seed. Because seeds don't look like much at first, but in time they grow into something unrecognizable compared to their beginning. And maybe just as important, what's one habit you could gently make harder? One thing you want to do less of, that you could add friction to? Maybe it's putting the snacks out of sight, or leaving your phone to charge in another room, or unsubscribing from those emails that tempt you into late-night shopping sprees. Little frictions can be as powerful as little nudges. For me, the lesson of this book is that your habits are like quiet companions. They walk alongside you every single day, whispering into the person you're becoming. They don't shout, they don't announce themselves. They just quietly, steadily add up. And if you choose them with care, they carry you closer to the life you want without you even noticing how far you've traveled. And I think that's why this book has touched so many people, because it doesn't promise an instant transformation. It promises something even better. It promises that ordinary people with ordinary lives can make extraordinary changes just by showing up for the small stuff. And isn't that what most of us need? A reminder that we're not failing because we're not dramatic enough. We just need to plant the right seeds. So as I close out today's episode, I want to say this. Don't wait for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, or the perfect motivation. Just pick one small thing, make it obvious, make it easy, make it satisfying, and let it be enough for now. Trust the process, trust the compounding effect of time, and trust yourself that with every tiny action, you are shaping the future version of you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I know there are a million things you could be doing right now, and the fact that you chose to listen, to sit with these ideas, it means the world. If this episode sparked something for you, if it got you thinking about your own habits in a new way, then I'm so glad we took this journey together. Take care of yourself, keep tending to those small seeds, and remember, you're always just one tiny choice away from a better path. This has been Lit Talk with Lisa, and until next time, I'm sending you love, gratitude, and the reminder that your habits are building your story one day at a time. Thank you, my friends. Truly.